Are there any questions from the audience?
Yeah, thank you very much for this second panel. Thank you to all the panelists. We heard very insightful comments on, I think, 3 topics. First one being democracy, second one being polarization driven by algorithm, and the third one being ecological crisis or climate change. So we learned a lot, but one topic that did not come up in this discussion, which I was a little bit surprised did not come up, was capitalism. Because I do think that capitalism is at the heart of all of these 3 topics. It is a key underlying cause. So to begin with democracy, we know that capitalism has many effects, good and bad. One effect is to accumulate more and more wealth in fewer and fewer hands. And we also know that economic wealth, economic power can be translated into political power. We saw Elon Musk donate almost $300 million to the Trump campaign, playing an integral part in his election victory. And we also know that almost every single campaign or the winner of almost every campaign in the United States is the campaign with the most money. So for Olivia, I would like to ask, how compatible is democracy with capitalism? And then I would like to ask the same question for all these topics. When it comes to polarization, so Lisa, you said that antagonistic models are the most profitable. If that's true, how can we combat that under a system that benefits or that earns money, capitalizes on this? And then obviously the link to climate change, I think, is so clear that I don't really need to elaborate on it. But how is it possible to combat climate change, which is a system that must grow forever, limitlessly, on a planet with limited resources? So please elaborate on capitalism. Thank you.
It's a huge question and a really important one, and especially in the U.S. right now. It's been capitalism on steroids, just without restraints, and that's contributed absolutely hugely to the problem, and it's getting worse and worse. The other day I saw that Trump had gained $3 billion personally since the start of his presidency. Then yesterday I saw the figure at $4 billion, whichever, I'm not sure. But this possibility, this constant enriching, and the level of corruption is just absolutely extraordinary in the U.S. So I don't think democracy is compatible with unbridled capitalism. And in the U.S., a lot of the restraints on the growth have been taken away. The constraints of money in political campaigns have been taken away. Our Supreme Court ruled that corporations can be treated to have the same rights as people. So I would say since President Reagan, we've removed restraint after restraint. And I think for democracy to progress in a healthy way, we need those constraints. How to get them back since they've been removed is really, really hard because, and then we have the links of the corporations with technology. It's driving a huge amount. And it's driving the inequality that Keith spoke to earlier that's feeding into the same grievances that are leading people to become totally disillusioned with democracy. So the question is super important. The problem is huge. I don't have a ready answer.
Yeah, I would just add that the technology companies now are the most profitable countries in the world, and they do that because they control and manipulate our minds with their algorithms that show us information that encourages us to vote one way and not another way, and to understand the world. So yes, I share your analysis of the problem and the challenge here. dismantling vulture capitalism, because I think it's a specific kind of capitalism that we're seeing right now, is not an easy thing. It will certainly take us having dialogue with each other to analyze that. I look at Paulo Freire from Brazil, who, basically analyzed capitalism with people in the favelas, in the slums of Brazil, by helping people to unravel the world that's around them and to see that it's this corporate greed and this rape of the earth that is happening. So I think the challenge of dialogue and, trying to take back our democracy and take back our ability to have dialogue with each other is a matter of unveiling the world and seeing it for what it is. And part of that is seeing capitalism and this vulture capitalism, this type of capitalism that is unrestrained by any sort of governance.
On the climate and environmental front, I mean, that this problem is hugely because of our consumption-based models for living. But I'm afraid of speaking for fear of sounding very naive, but I'll say it anyway because I want to just try and put some hope into the room. I think there's also space to use markets for in the way that they create competition, they can create these kind of races to the top. So if we look at the renewables market, can this create the geopolitical catalyst that we need? Because do the US, I have no idea what to say about this, but are the kind of rational economic actors, do they want China to have this unchallenged market dominance on solar, on pretty much on wind now, and all renewable technology? No. So whilst they've got the first mover advantages at the moment, I think you can see that there is this kind of capitalism-driven momentum for others to come into this space. And I think, and of course, everything that's bad about capitalism also is bringing down the costs of renewables, and this potentially has some opportunities for good. We also saw, and this is a flawed example, but we also saw efforts with the EU, with the green growth strategy, to kind of put a green policy lens on kind of the growth models for Europe and partners. So I think there are ways that we can see, like, not just to totally dismantle the structure that we're in, but find ways that we can work with it. And this does need governance and it does need policy. But like with China, there's not really that much kind of governance as we understand it. And then the final part of this, it's a really micro example, but I think part of this is also, if we think about what we in this room can do within the capitalist world we're in, we can also think about, what would it take to shift behaviors and preferences and attitudes in ourselves and our circles, because we can change our consumption patterns. And I think this is something that I can hold on to. And again, it's something that we can see. If I think about like 5 years ago, I would not have thought veganism would be so widespread in Europe. And this is a huge shift in people's attitudes and consumption patterns, because it's kind of become trendy. It's been like influencers have brought this to a different space. So I feel like there are opportunities within this terrible social media influenced world where we're all obsessed with consuming, that we can consume in a different direction. So maybe there's some opportunities too.
So yeah, I really appreciate you raising the capitalism issue. Just to add to the complexity of another thing that we didn't really go into a lot, although I probably should have mentioned it more explicitly, is that tied up with, the challenges of democracy and, profit seeking and climate change is also for many Indigenous peoples around the world the most, prominent theme in their minds, in which all of these things are tied up, is the issue of, ongoing colonisation and decolonisation as a priority. So, there's that level of complexity to add to this when it comes to the many Indigenous peoples around the world. And I see that in the Pacific. But, decolonisation, I think, is leading some of the solutions in the Pacific. It's a good force for change. So there is a lot of hope that can come through thinking with a decolonial mindset that I think actually, that the rest of the world has to kind of take pretty seriously. And the Indigenous people are increasingly asking for that. And it is something I think that all of the rest of us have to really actually think about a lot more deeply.
Yeah, thank you for the question. Shall we take another one before I ask Stein to come up to end the session and the seminar?
Thank you very much for such a rich and informative discussion. I have learned a lot. So I have a quick question, which is going to Olivia and Lisa. So when I look at the global trend of the democratic backsliding and the political polarization, I can easily imagine that there must be a lot of very sensitive and context-specific causes in each country, especially in the so-called developing countries, such as in African countries. So at the same time, those sensitive causes are the one of the most difficult factor to address, right? So if you have any good examples from your research project to demonstrate the effectiveness of the locally grounded countermeasures against the democratic backsliding and the political polarization, could you kindly share with us?
It's a great question. So in your mind, you were particularly interested in developing countries.
Exactly.
Yeah. I mean, I think one of the challenges in the developing world, or especially with the end of colonialism, is that so much emphasis around independence was sort of imposed democracy and Western approaches to democracy. And the key thing was have elections. And that was happening before countries even had a political culture around political parties. And so what that tended to do was to just, political parties started forming around tribal identities or religious identities, clan identities, creating more division. And I think that's been a particular struggle for developing countries to find democratic forms that are in keeping with their traditional cultures. And I know that in the series we've just had on the MENA region, on North Africa and the Middle East, there's been a lot of thinking around how does democracy, well, you spoke to this, Lisa, fit with traditional Islamic values? Because easily there can then be a split between Islamic countries and the secular West, and democracy gets associated with the secular West. So how do we, I'm not coming up with a specific example for you, but I think it's really critical that we think about forms of governance that really fit with local culture. I think there are African countries where they've successfully combined customary law with more westernized approaches to democracy. I know, yeah. But Lisa, you were working specifically on this in Afghanistan in a way.
Right, and I guess I would just reaffirm what you've said. It's everywhere in the world. So in Brazil and Colombia, people are realizing that dialogue is the solution. It's part of their tradition in every part of the world, and it's part of the solution. And so, many of us have spent our lives trying to help people create spaces for dialogue. And I just want to encourage us, it is laying the foundation, and it is a core part of what we need to do. It's not maybe the whole solution, but the answer is there in our history and our community DNA for how we get along.